It's over 9,000!
Welcome, Super Elite Warriors, to Final Forum, a podcast for the discussion of all things Dragon Ball. I am your host, Jelly, an elite recruiting member of the Frieza Force on a mission to find the best warriors from across the galaxy to join the greatest army of all time. And I am joined, as always, by my new recruit co-host.
Hello, listeners. This is the Bekinney.
Bekinney, I gotta say, you look rejuvenated again. Getting terribly frightened must do something to your species that takes years off your life.
Is that what you call it? Being frightened?
Well, yes, that's what I'd call stumbling across a hive of slumbering, bioluminescent giant insects that want to eat you. Yeah, I was scared.
Oh, scared. Yeah, I guess I was, eventually.
You're a weird, whatever you are, Bekinney.
To pronounce it correctly, I'd probably have to pull out your tongue.
Yeah, let's not worry about phonetics here.
I thought you might feel that way. Hey, let's take a left here, going on the right.
Good eye, recruit. And yes, listeners, at least Bekinney's little blunder helped us figure out which way to go to stay alive. We just steer clear of the glowing lights, which lead to, I don't know, what were those, larvae?
Maybe. Not sure. Who knows? Does it even matter?
In any event, we just steer clear of the lights and stay alive.
Or get lost more and more until we die of starvation or thirst. We've been walking for hours, and for all I know, we're just going in circles. I feel like we've passed that stalagmite over there 4 or 5 times.
Easy, recruit. Keep your head on your shoulders. Left up ahead, by the way. We'll make it out of this yet, or my name isn't Jelly the Translucent.
Is that your full name?
I'd like it to be.
We're gonna die down here. Left again. Listen, do you think the reason those clusters are where they are is because those creatures gather near the entrances in order to emerge and feed? We haven't seen any other signs of life in these caves. What if every time we turn away from one of those things, we're just turning away from a possible exit?
You're the biology expert. Besides, I'd say we're about to find out.
Why is that?
Because up ahead, there's only one way, and it's glowing. I need you to tell me everything you remember about being in that chamber with those things. How many were there? Were they grouped together or just all over the place? Was there anything going on the other side of the chamber? We need a plan of attack here.
I don't know, man. I died when I was in there. And then I ran out here, then we ran away, then we blasted the roof and crushed them in the cave-in.
Listen, calm down. Listen to the water dripping down the walls. Ease yourself. Think. Take a breath. And while you think, let's discuss our topic for the week. And this week, we are going to be tackling none other than the creator of Dragon Ball, Akira Toriyama. So, we've talked a lot already at length about the anime, to an extent, right? We've gone through 13 episodes of this anime. We've gone through 23 chapters of the manga, and now we're going to peel back a little bit and talk about the creator. And, you know, one of the reasons we're doing it in that order is because I think, like, with anything that you eventually become a fan of, you start off with the final product first. You know, on my home planet, we receive National Football League broadcasts, and I'm a lifelong Buffalo Bills fan. I didn't grow up being a fan of the game of football, being a fan of the way plays are drawn, being a fan of any of the players that are currently on the team, because they did not play when I was a wee little jelly sprout. I grew up being a fan of the whole experience, the camaraderie, the fandom, being there, yelling, cheering, etc., all that stuff. When I'm a huge kaiju fan, as this podcast has probably already exposed and will continue to expose. If you haven't picked up on it, you will, because there's going to be probably more kaiju content coming down the pipeline. I've got some plans for like some just fun, special one-off episodes. I didn't become a fan of Ishiro Honda, the director, first. I became a fan of watching Godzilla movies. I became a fan of the product. And so that was kind of our approach with this, is let's introduce the product. Let's introduce the thing that draws most people in first, then talk about some of the stuff that goes on behind it, behind the scenes. Sort of, here's the completed product. Now let's back away a little bit and take a look at the nuts and bolts. I think that makes sense.
That's some solid structure right there. That makes perfect sense to me.
Yeah. So today we're going to be talking about Akira Toriyama. And I just want to say, before we get too deep into this particular episode, this episode for sure would not be possible without the book Dragon Ball Culture by Derek Padula. I've read 2 of these things so far. He has written, I believe, 6 of them to date. They're fantastic. I'm going to go out on a limb and say that they're all fantastic, even though I've only read 2 of them. We base a lot of our data and facts for this show off of these books. As I've gone around, and I've always seen, like, I do more reading than just those to try and get topics of discussion for us to talk about and facts and things. I don't know that, looking around, I have ever seen anyone present different facts than what Derek presents so far in these books, in terms of cultural significance behind things. Certainly with this Toriyama stuff that we're about to go into, in terms of just the facts of Toriyama's life. I've definitely seen people interpret those facts differently, editorialize them differently, emphasize them differently, but I have never seen anyone bring up more or different facts than what Derek brings up in these books. I have seen them omit, either intentionally or not, facts that he does present. So I just want to say that this wouldn't be possible without his book, Dragon Ball Culture. And also, if we get anything wrong, that's on us. I'm trying to take hundreds of pages of research and study that have gone into making these books and condense them down to 45-minute to an hour shows for everyone out there to listen to, because I think it's interesting. If that means I omit something important or change something slightly that I don't think is a big deal but actually changes things, number 1, that's on me, and number 2, I encourage anyone out there who's listening who picks up on something to correct us. We will
also,
correct things.
We work for the Frieza Force. Obviously, the Frieza Force can do no wrong. So even if you are wrong, shh, we're right.
So that's my disclaimer on this. But with this episode in particular, there has never been a book in English that has come out that has just strictly been the Akira Toriyama biography. I even think there's only been like one in Japanese, and I don't know that it's official. I think it's like unofficial. And we're going to get into some of the reasons and talk about kind of why that is, because of who Toriyama is as a person. But
it becomes readily apparent very quickly.
but there's never been anything like that, and the closest you will ever get is in Derek Padula's book, Dragon Ball Culture Volume 1, which is the introduction, really, to the world of Dragon Ball and the background on Akira Toriyama. So, without much further ado, let's just dive right into it. Akira Toriyama was born in 1955 in Nagoya, but he grows up in a small, quiet country village. I believe it's pronounced Kyosu, where he actually still lives. Very early in his life, he reads Astro Boy, and he loves drawing. He would copy draw manga as a 5-year-old, and when he sees 101 Dalmatians, it's a lightning in the bottle kind of moment for him. It fires off in his brain and makes him realize like he's just astounded and astonished by those drawings as he sees them unfold on the screen. He draws a scene from it from memory and submits it to a local art contest and wins. This is when he was, somewhere around like 6 or 7 years old, I think. He starts drawing portraits of family and friends. He constantly challenges himself to draw things from memory until he's pretty confident that there's nothing he can't draw. He grows up watching Showa-era entertainment and is inspired to keep his stories light and simple. The eras in Japan are divided based on the emperor at the time, and often in entertainment are actually pretty reflective of their given generations. There's been in like most people's lifetimes, and in fact I think in all of Japanese film and television, there's been 3 eras: the Showa era, the Heisei era, and I believe it's pronounced Reiwa era. The Showa era is from like the 40s, 50s, like the end of World War II up through 1970 or 1985, 86, in that range, actually. So forget what I said about 70s. That's a misspeak. That entertainment tends to be silly, fun, targeted more towards kids. It's easily understood by many. It runs, from the immediate post-war time to the mid-80s. This is where you get like a lot of the golden age of Japanese film for sure, and the emergence of television as a main driving factor. You actually get the decline. You get the golden age of Japanese film, and you actually get the decline in the 70s. The next era is the Heisei era. It's when stories get a little more serious, a little more serialized, a little less episodic type of things. It runs from the mid 80s until like very recently. And the Reiwa era just started. I think it started in like 2019. It might be 2017. It's not super duper important, but it's very recently that Japan has said this now is the Reiwa era. So Toriyama, when promoting Dragon Ball Z Battle of Gods in 2013, he says that stories have gotten too serious and he just wants people to have fun. So you could see how those stories he grew up reading and watching, the Showa era stuff, is what really inspires him and wants him to continue entertaining people. Toriyama grows up on TV. He kind of falls in love at first sight. He watches Astro Boy, Iron Man number 28, Osamatsu-kun. Osamatsu-kun is where the infamous she dance is created, which becomes a craze in Japan in the 60s. It permeates pop culture to such an extent that Godzilla himself does the she dance in 1966's Godzilla vs. Monster Zero, aka Invasion of Astro Monster. This is actually one of the big things that leads Ishiro Honda to leaving the Godzilla series for a time and only coming back then a couple other times to do kind of special entries in the series that were intended to be like the last entry. So that's this Osamatsu-kun. If you're listening out there and you're a friend of mine and you're a kaiju person, Osamatsu-kun is where Godzilla does this she dance from in 1966's Monster Zero.
So all the anime Toriyama watches are based on manga. That's just kind of how it goes. A manga becomes popular, it gets, turned into an anime and put on TV. So he internalizes that if you want to have a popular anime, which is ultimately his goal, you should have a popular manga to start. This in turn is what drives him to decide to become a mangaka, or someone who draws manga. Though he loves TV, Toriyama spends a great deal of time also watching movies. But with the huge surge of TV not happening until like 60s and 70s, he instead went to the movies very regularly. And this influences his style in a big way. He says, "I always play the stories out as movie scenes in my head and imagine how they would unfold." In particular, as a young guy, Toriyama watches a lot of kaiju movies. He prefers the child audience-driven 60s and 70s era kaiju fare, and in particular is inspired by the flashy energy blasts that become extremely commonplace in the later part of Showa-era kaiju movie boom. These blasts become a key point of Dragon Ball, as anyone who is familiar with the show knows. You can often compare the Kamehameha to Godzilla's atomic breath. They're very similar, both in shape, color, and everything. And we've even got an example of some fan art of Goku standing in Godzilla's open mouth, firing out the Kamehameha wave. It's fun. We're going to probably post it on social. So he's always watching movies, especially on days when he's working. He says, it doesn't matter what channel. I generally leave the television on while I'm working. He also says, I love sci-fi movies, especially Alien. That's my favorite. I incorporate science fiction into Dragon Ball to expand its scope. So we can see that while he prefers that sort of lighthearted show affair, he's also really influenced by the more serious stuff that he seems to downplay in some of his other quotes when it's appropriate, and especially when it's done well, because you see he ends up being gravitated towards the classics, much like, Alien. But this mix plays into Dragon Ball, and it's a huge part of its appeal. And the idea of bringing in sci-fi elements plays more into the Z portion as opposed to Dragon Ball. But obviously, that's probably I'm pretty sure at this point it's the longest section of the story. So obviously it's a huge influence.
Right.
Toriyama also enjoys World War II period films, taking special interest in the aesthetics and uniforms and technology. This also plays into him being a big fan of model building. He compulsively buys models. He never gets around to building them, unfortunately, but he always buys them when he sees them because he's afraid they'll go out of production before he ever actually has the impulse to build the model. He likes to build the models so that he can kind of like turn them every which way, all 360 degrees in his hands, and really kind of get a complete feel for the thing that he's building. With the way that he also likes to focus on like memorizing how to draw things, it's probably also an excellent artist's reference whenever he decides he needs a particular car or something that he wants to draw.
Right. And as someone who has quite a few friends who are into like the collecting community, I don't know about you, but like the idea of stuff going out of production and then being ridiculously expensive on the secondary market that's legitimate.
I don't do much like models like cars or planes or anything like that, but most of my stuff is usually like minis, like Warhammer or like Dungeons and Dragons. And yes, that is 100% a concern. Furthermore, and possibly obviously, Toriyama is a big fan of kung fu movies, especially Bruce Lee, specifically Enter the Dragon. He says, I remember I got so hopped up on it that I went to the movie theater for about 10 days straight, which he's got me beat there. I don't think there's ever a movie that I've gone to see 10 days straight in the theater. Yeah,
me neither. But again, this is the 60s, the 70s. It's a different time, right?
True. Back then, you would go to see movies, and it was more like double features, and then there would be like other things interspersed with it as well. So It was more like a whole afternoon type thing as opposed to just like a couple hours.
Yeah, it was more of a thing to do for the day, So
true. So of course, no fan of kung fu movies would be a fan if they didn't also love Jackie Chan. He says there was a huge boom in kung fu movies, and around that time I saw Jackie Chan in Drunken Master and got hooked. Although I must have watched that over 200 times. Again, got me beat there. I've definitely never watched Drunken Master 200 times. Toriyama's also said to have mined Drunken Master for material often, which makes sense. He's a big fan of all things Shaw Brothers and Golden Harvest, the classic kung fu movie, basically lineage. And the films for these two studios influenced the style of his fights and his use of tournaments, which we'll be getting to very soon. Also remember, Toriyama's not a scholar. His knowledge of Chinese pop culture and even aspects of traditional Chinese culture are informed more by the 70s era boom of kung fu movies being imported to Japan. So when we talk about the influence of Chinese culture in Dragon Ball, it's either something that sort of just permeates his world sort of ubiquitously. Say, for instance, like most Americans know who Santa Claus is, despite him being primarily a Christian-rooted creation, or, comes from something like a Jackie Chan movie.
Yeah, Toriyama is so into movies and TV that as he ages into adolescence, he essentially stops reading manga at all. He's president of the manga club in high school, but he doesn't read any manga, and though he still draws, he never finishes any manga he attempts to start drawing as a teen. He's in the club because he likes to draw and he likes the idea of it, but he's kind of too, I'll say, scatterbrained, for lack of a better word, to commit to it at this point in his life. This kind of being a little bit unfocused and a little hesitant to commit to things pulls through later in his life as well. Despite being a mangaka, he's less influenced by his contemporaries or predecessors in his field than he is by anime and the movie adaptations of those works. This is a big part of what makes Dragon Ball unique and what causes Toriyama to struggle to break into the field, actually. He doesn't structure his stories like traditional manga. He's already thinking of the movies and the TV as he writes. The other thing to note is the man is an introvert, big time. He says,
I'd be tempted to almost call him a hermit, really.
He says, quote, "When I look at it, I don't really like people, and socializing is really awful. Outside of my family, friends, and those connected to my job, I don't actively want to meet anyone." He especially hates big cities, and he lives, in his own words, in the sticks. He even says he'd like to move further into the country and would if not for his job, because he still occasionally runs into people, and even worse, people who recognize him every now and then. He's forced to do interviews for work, and he's given a bunch of them in his career, but they're short, they're to the point, and he never poses for pictures or socializes before or after, and we'll shortly discuss why.
He struggles in his early career with workaday jobs. He does not fit in with your typical salaryman. Salaryman being the Japanese term for what we might call a stuffed shirt or typical white-collar worker. Corporate drone, shows up on time, well-dressed, does their job, puts in 110%, does everything extra that they're asked to do, always chasing the next promotion. He dresses how he pleases. Though he's willing to stay and work late when needed, he also likes to sleep, particularly in the mornings. So he takes every second he possibly can to get to work exactly on time if everything goes perfectly, which obviously doesn't happen often. So this leads to him being 10 to 15 minutes late quite often, and he's regularly scolded by his superiors. He grows so tired of salaryman life and the constant scolding that after one day of he compares his salary and bonus to another coworker with much less experience and finds that they're actually being paid more because they show up on time. So he quits. His parents do not approve of this, as I can't imagine any parents would. He pays his bills via freelance work, and he kind of just putters around, picks up a manga one day, sees they're running a contest for submissions with a $5,000 reward, as well as, publishing the work in the manga. And he decides to tell his parents, I'm gonna actually buckle down and try to become a mangaka. And I'm going to do it within 2 years. If I don't do it within 2 years, I'm going to give up, and I'll do whatever it is that you guys want me to do. So he puts his nose to the grindstone and misses his first deadline for submission. Ever the procrastinator, this one deadline Toriyama can't make. Real quick aside. So this is a common theme with Toriyama and his work. He's a noted procrastinator. This is something he is famous for in the industry. He always waits until the last minute to do his work, often just spending like 2 to 4 days right before his deadline, not sleeping and scrambling to finish something. This usually means he doesn't have time to storyboard things out or go through a first draft process, and he often writes himself into corners. This is both where he does his best work, as well as a good source of inspiration for him, as he puts it. Under a deadline with all of his cylinders needing to fire, and paradoxically, the source of some of the biggest complaints of his storytelling. He's accused of deus ex machina moments often, but without this pressure, he wouldn't have written himself into enough of a corner to have bust out the initial Super Saiyan transformation, which, yeah, that's what it is, folks. He wrote himself into a corner and just said, well, I'm just going to throw this out there and see if it sticks.
And he got
absolutely did.
He got too held up to a deadline that he didn't have time to color in Goku's hair. That's why he turns blonde.
That's... I did not know that part. That's oh man, that's great. So yeah, all these memorable moments in the show oftentimes are, for lack of a better term, ass pulls that he just puts out there because he runs out of time. Anyway, So he notices that Shonen Jump is running a similar contest to the first one that sort of sparked this sudden drive for him to become a mangaka. So he decides to submit to them and promptly loses again. So he tries again next year, loses a second time. So now he's kind of a little confused as to why it's not working out for him. He's down on his luck, and he's about to hit that 2-year self-imposed deadline when he gets a phone call.
Yep, and it's Kazuhiko Torishima, an editor at Shonen Jump. He tells Toriyama to send him some pages. He likes his style. He wants to see if he can get him into the publication. Why, though? Because he's a contest loser, so why is this guy calling him? So it turns out, and supposedly at least as of like just a few years ago still, this is how Shonen Jump actually works. Each month, one of their editors is in charge of reviewing all the submissions that come in, or as many of them as they can get to, and reaching out to potential mangaka they think they can take under their wing and groom into being a publishable artist. I guess this is a different job than going over the contest submissions, but Toriyama, in any event, is lucky that Torishima is currently reviewing submissions. Torishima is similarly young. He's only been doing this for a year or two at this point. And he also similarly does not read much manga himself. So you've got a mangaka or a potential mangaka who doesn't read any manga, and an editor who also does not read any manga. Torishima selects Toriyama because of the signature style, where Toriyama uses kanji, katakana, and romaji, which is, English language letters, throughout his work. It's unique. It pops off the page. Torishima's like, I like this. So Torishima asks Toriyama for some pages. Toriyama submits them, and Torishima's like, that's bad. Try again. Toriyama tries again. Torishima's like, this is boring. Stop being boring. As mentors go, he's really not much for encouragement. Try again. Toriyama tries again and does his very best to be to the point and interesting. And that's when Toriyama finally makes his debut in Weekly Shonen Jump with a one-shot called Wonder Island about a failed kamikaze pilot. His plane just has a malfunction. He crashes on an island 35 years ago, and he's been trying to get back home ever since. It's pretty fun. It's full of Toriyama's style, especially the sort of earlier style of Dragon Ball, or the style of Dragon Bump, Dr. Slump. Dragon Bump. I don't know what that is. You can look it up pretty easily via Googling Akira Toriyama Wonder Island, but it's not great. And if I'll editorialize for just a moment, there's some problems with the pacing and the structure and the overall storytelling. And the art itself lacks any of the interesting backgrounds or paneling that we see in Dragon Ball. It's fun. It takes 3 minutes to read, but it is very amateurish.
And it seems you have your thumb on the pulse of the people, Jelly, because the readers do not like it either. Out of millions of votes for reader feedback cast that week for that issue, his gets voted for being good a mere 14 times out of millions of votes. Torishima still believes in Toriyama, however. He thinks it's unique, gives him another chance. Wonder Island gets another entry. Readers don't like that one either. Torishima perseveres with his young potential mangaka and gives him another shot. Today's Highlight Island is much better received, though still not great, but shows that Toriyama's improving. Then Torishima asks Toriyama to give him a manga with a cute girl protagonist to appeal to young boys. He creates Tomato Girl Detective about a young attractive girl who becomes a detective and is constantly stumbling her way into catching the bad guy. This one's pretty well received and is somewhat of a hit. Toriyama is considered a rising star at this point, so Torishima continues to push him and says, hey, give me another manga with a female protagonist. Now, Toriyama doesn't like drawing girls in the front and center of his work because he doesn't believe his readers will identify them because they're being published in a magazine for young boys. So his logic is, well, why would young boys want to read about a young girl? Toriyama makes a deal with him. He says, look, I'll write a couple chapters of a manga with a girl as the protagonist, and if it's not a hit, don't ever ask me to put a girl in the center of my stories ever again. Torishima agrees. So the manga that Toriyama creates for this bet is called Dr. Slump.
And Dr. Slump is a runaway success. So much so that even in its first chapter, that things Toriyama intended to be one-time gags are so well received, he feels beholden to them forever. He doesn't like drawing glasses on people, but he receives a lot of fan mail praising him for putting a character with glasses at the center of a story, and that it makes those people who are writing in feel better about their own glasses, that he keeps the glasses on a rail? Is it a rail or a rale? I should probably know that.
We probably should both know that, considering what this podcast is about. But, whatever.
But he wanted it to just be a one-time joke, but those glasses are now, they're there to stay. Dr. Slump itself is going to be a discussion for another time, but it's important to note that it's the product of Toriyama and Torishima having their push-pull relationship that they have. Torishima wants certain things in the story, Toriyama does them a certain way, Torishima pushes back, and they end up kind of beating each other in the face until they come to a middle point. For example, Torishima wants a robot in this story, and Toriyama says, okay, I'll do a robot, but it's going to be giant-sized. And that would never work in paneling. You could never have a giant-sized robot on the same screen as normal-sized characters. So Torishima tells him to get real. So Toriyama draws this like a standard boring robot. Torishima says, dude, try again. Toriyama thinks, hey, maybe I can appease Torishima, do two birds with one stone and stop his nagging. Here's a cute young girl robot. Torishima's like, you got something there. So they have this respectful relationship, but it's also very contentious, with Toriyama always trying to push the envelope as far as he can, and Torishima having to push it back. And then he has to pull this stubborn artist of his in directions he's uncomfortable going. For instance, it's very customary for mangaka to include pictures of themselves when they're getting published for serials. Serialized publication, being every single week. Torishima insists that Toriyama sends a picture. Toriyama says, get bent. Torishima insists again. Toriyama sends in a drawing of himself as a bird. Torishima then goes to the lawyers and finds a clause in the contract that he's able to kind of throw in Toriyama's face and say, you have to submit a picture. Toriyama does, but it's one of him peeing into a toilet. Torishima just uses it anyways.
I love that anecdote. It's so good.
Toriyama then gets his own form of payback. He sends in a manuscript for the chapter that introduces the main antagonist of Dr. Slump extremely close to the deadline. Too late for Torishima to make any changes at all, almost, but definitely too late for him to make any significant changes. And the villain is a caricature of Torishima with the syllables or the kanji of the editor's name in reverse. So instead of Torishima, it's Mashirito. Ultimately, however, after even all this constant butting of heads and kind of getting these little nitpicks and paybacks with each other, each one of them says their work would not be the success that it is without these conflicts and disagreements. This bickering is what leads to their success.
So when merchandising and money kick in, Toriyama basically doesn't care. As long as his needs are met and he can buy the things that he wants, he does not care. His hands are full writing and drawing for his manga anyways, so he lets Torishima handle it. He's often sent samples for approval for different products and whatnot, but he says looking at it stack up unused makes him uncomfortable. He's flush with cash. He doesn't like to fuss over a whole lot of things, so he just buys another house and stores everything there, where it's just out of sight, out of mind. I would love to have that kind of money. Just buy another house.
Just buy my neighbor's house.
Throw all the things I don't need over there. Another thing that happens is an unofficial fan club starts in the wake of this early success, and Toriyama's flattered to such an extent that he starts to send them letters, sketches, unpublished stories that maybe are on the cutting room floor, as it were. And the club starts to grow so large that it eventually becomes acknowledged as the official Toriyama fan club. Now he's renowned, established, and he and author Akira Sakuma, who I think was his assistant at some point, or is that right?
At this point, I think. If not, his assistant just assists on this.
They decide to collaborate together and write 12 short funny stories to kind of like help people understand how do you become a mangaka and how do you like produce a manga. These become something of a Bible for aspiring mangaka, and very few current mangaka in the years shortly after this was released say that they are unfamiliar with it. So this becomes like the go-to book for people who want to become a mangaka.
Yeah, and in a typical sort of Toriyama self-deprecating style, it's called Akira Toriyama's Crummy Manga Lab.
Manga Lab, yes. It's also in this short manga that Toriyama creates the robot personification of himself, which he then uses as a character to introduce things, or in his letters section of his tankobons and things like that. Tankobons being the collection of like multiple chapters that are released separately from the weekly serialization. When you see this little robot, which looks like it's wearing a gas mask and has like little clamp hands, almost kind of like Lego minifigs, that's supposed to be Toriyama talking to you. And this thing pops up in the background of his work at times too. It's officially called Robo Toriyama, but like as soon as that name is stuck on the character, like everybody just sort of drops it, and most fans just start taking to calling him Toribot instead, which in my opinion is a much better name. Toriyama says he's glad he came up with this character though, especially early in his career, so that he could spend more time not being recognized by people in public, which of course that's going to be his takeaway from it.
Right.
And I believe Toribot was in, I think it's the episode where they take the turtle to the beach, if I remember correctly. It's like halfway up a palm tree or something like that.
Yes. It's right around there. It's in a very early episode of the show, and it's also in the background too of the manga. He kind of inserts himself because that's Toriyama. This man is introverted. Because
that's what you do when you're an introvert / hermit.
Yeah. But despite being so introverted at this point in the very early 80s, he's out. He's looking for love. He bumps into a family friend in town one day, and she invites him out, and he really doesn't want to go. But when she says that the others who are going are mainly mangaka and she has some girlfriends he might like to meet, he sucks it up and he goes. There he meets Nachi Mikami, a fellow mangaka, and he becomes smitten. He says, quote, "I admired her for her adult personality and her attention to people's needs. I like efficient people. I'm pretty impatient, so I can't stand people who putter around. Efficient, sexy women are great." So she's no nonsense, and she doesn't play games, and he's into that. He also likes girl with short hair and glasses, and guess what? Nachi Mikami has both of those. So they plan to, after dating for a while, get married in a quiet ceremony at Toriyama's home in 1982. And unfortunately, a list of Japan's top money-earning people of 1981 is published the day before the wedding. This is significant because Toriyama is listed as number 1 in the other category, which is like a catch-all for anyone who's not a CEO, a major tech innovator, a movie star, like someone who is kind of supposed to make a ton of money. There's this other category for people like you wouldn't think that someone working in that position would make that much money type of thing. So he's number 1 in that category. And I think he's like, don't hold me to this, but I think he's like 38th in the country overall. So the media...
That's impressive for a man that draws comics.
Yeah. So the media flock to his house with questions about his response to this news on his wedding day. Toriyama's so flustered. Yeah, at first he thinks like, oh, what's going on? What's this about my wedding? And then he gets all these questions that are like, what about money? What about money? And he's so flustered. He's so tired. He's so over it. He vows never to show his face in public again, and the extent to which he's successful is staggering when you think about a man who is often called the most important and influential living mangaka and is routinely ranked number 3 behind the creators of Astro Boy and Doraemon in terms of all-time influential mangaka. So you've got like the 2 creators of Japan's like 2 earliest manga and then Toriyama. So you got the guys who create the entire genre, the entire medium, basically, and then the next person on the list is Akira Toriyama. So he appears in a televised interview in 1983, and he's noticeably uncomfortable. Nobody knows really why he decided to make that appearance, but the experience must have made him uncomfortable enough that he doubles down on the idea of never showing his face again hard. His next televised interview is in 2013, and it's a minute long, and he refuses to allow them to film his face.
Wow.
So he goes from 1983 to 2013, 30 years without ever appearing in front of a television camera at all. And when he finally does, he's on there and he's like, hi, yes, no, bye. His last public appearance in the world was in 2002 at, I think this was a launch party for Shonen Jump's USA publication branch. American voice actor Chris Sabat, who voices Vegeta, noted that Toriyama seemed very uncomfortable, said he was like sweating and stuff, and left without socializing afterwards. That's pretty much it. As we noted, he's given interviews over the years, but they've all been verbal or written. That's really all we know about this guy as a person. He has taken himself so out of the limelight. You know, yes, he's given interviews, but they all stay very, very on the topic of the thing he's being interviewed about, right? He doesn't ever get personal in his interviews, or he extremely rarely does. So his interviews are, you know, promoting Battle of Gods, and he's like, yeah, I just wanted to do a fun story. Dragon Ball's back. Yay. You know, and yeah. That's it. You know, we could discuss more about the creation and success and run and end of Dr. Slump, and we could do the same with Dragon Ball, but, you know, we'll kind of save all that for another time. We're going to focus, this is our Toriyama episode, and Toriyama is such a big fan of kaiju movies, actually, that I don't know how he winds up doing this, but he winds up being an extra in 1984's Godzilla Returns. He's in the movie. He's a background. Impressive. He's a background character. I'm gonna get that screenshot of it, and I'm gonna post it to our social.
Take that, Toriyama. We got your picture.
from 84, 2 years after he said he would never be pictured again.
Never be pictured again, huh? Then why are you in a Godzilla movie?
But yeah, talk about, like, there you go. He was able to break his reclusiveness for that. Yeah, that's really everything that we kind of know about this guy. He's very reclusive. I don't know. How do you feel about that? Do you think he goes a step too far? Does he owe the fans more, or is the content enough? I know what I think, but I'm gonna want to hear maybe what you think.
As someone who's done like a lot of reading of books and stuff like that, a lot of authors generally don't end up in the limelight. So it's not surprising to me that maybe he doesn't want to be. It's a little surprising, like the extents that he goes to. Like, I don't want to give a picture to run alongside the manga so that people don't know what I look like, so they leave me alone in public. Like that seems like he's a little too closed off from everybody. But at the same time, I'm not of the opinion that people should be entitled to interacting with the author of a work. I feel like if you like the work, enjoy the work, you don't have to pester the author about it, essentially.
Right. Yeah.
So I don't think it's necessarily too far. I think what it is I'm more surprised that he's been given that much rope to be that reclusive.
Right. Yeah. He satisfies the bare minimum of what he's contractually obligated to do, you know?
And even then he still fights it.
Right. I don't think he owes really anyone anything, right? This is that people kind of, and I think most people over the more recent years of pop culture have kind of come to that realization. You know, these celebrities they don't owe you anything because what they're creating is enough. You know, like he's given me and others, but me personally, he's given me hundreds of hours of entertainment. The dude does not owe me a single other thing, right? Because that's more than I deserve. But yeah, they just like if you Google Akira Toriyama and go into Google search, you'll like the pictures are all from like the 80s, and there's like one blurry shot of him sitting in one of those director style chairs, and that's that 2002 launch party for this Shonen Jump publishing arm in the US, and like that's it. This dude, it's kind of incredible. And even he says like he says he only goes to Tokyo like, I don't know, it's something like once a month or something. He goes to like meet with his editor, who I don't believe is Torishima anymore, and he just goes to like meet with him and be like, how's it going? Okay, bye. And like he hates how crowded the city is. I think is it agoraphobia? Like, I'm not sure if it's agoraphobia necessarily, because it doesn't seem like he never talks about like not leaving his house at all. He talks about just not wanting to be recognized. So whatever, it's people phobia.
I think at some level it's probably agoraphobia, and it kind of makes sense because like when we were talking about like his one television interview earlier, like he was super nervous and like he was fumbling over his words and being like very awkward in general and being very preoccupied with the fact that like there's cameras everywhere. The other interview he does in 2013, he's just like, no, I don't want anybody filming my face. But he still does, the written interviews and things like that. So it's like he's still willing to put information out there or talk about certain things. But it's almost like it's the being around other people that he doesn't like.
Yeah, it's like some level of like anthropophobia. He just doesn't want to be around people. But how do you feel about this guy's working style? I mean, it's that thing of we mentioned it. He's a noted procrastinator, and yeah, it leads to some cool stuff, but it does for sure lead to some like the biggest complaints that people have with his work.
I mean, any procrastinator is going to make a group project way more insufferable. I mean, that's just how it's going to be. Honestly, I found it kind of funny reading about his work habits because they very much mirror my own, where I put things off to the last possible minute. I like to have like TV on in the background or some kind of noise or something, so I'm not completely in my own head when I'm doing stuff. It's unfortunate that he's in the line of work where he has constant deadlines and he's just screwing it up by being a procrastinator, but I definitely personally identify with how he gets things done.
Yeah, and that's I do think there's an element of like, I've done a little writing before, and I also do a bit of reading. I love Stephen King. He's my favorite author of novels. He says in his book on writing, which if you're a writer or you want to be, you should absolutely read that book. It's a little autobiographic for portions of it, and then he talks about his method and his approach and his style and everything like that. I would just very highly recommend that book. But he talks in there about how he doesn't map out his stories. He doesn't plan things out. He just starts writing and sees where the story takes him. And he admits that sometimes that takes him down a path that gets him into trouble of having unpublishable kind of works. When you're an author and you sit down and write a story and it comes out that the story is 112 pages long and it's done, that is not a short story and that is not a novel. That's something that sits in a weird middle ground, and you just sit on it until you make like 4 more of those, and then you publish a book of novellas. But
I was just about to say that too.
But it's not something you can plan. And I agree with that approach for sure. And I understand the mentality of I need to have that pressure of a deadline in order to be able to knuckle down and focus. It is surprising to me the extent to which Toriyama lives by that, needing that deadline, and beyond needing that deadline, like he doesn't do anything. He hasn't done anything over 40 years to artificially impose a deadline on himself so that he can get stuff done in the real deadline.
Yeah, I wonder if that's almost part of the, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of approach to things.
Maybe.
Or if maybe he's worried that if he adjusts his process, he'll lose the magic sauce, if you will.
That's possible, yeah. To think that, you get these moments that, obviously, I was introduced to the Super Saiyan thing through the anime. In fact, I talked about it. That was like the first thing I ever saw. And it's this iconic moment, where Goku loses his temper and loses control and explodes, and not explodes literally, but emotionally, and now he's this glowing heroic figure, and it's because Toriyama ran out of time to color the scene in, It's stuff like, and he has said too that he's also he liked it because it helped him with, he's notoriously lazy is the other thing. Like he's a lazy procrastinator who basically I identify with this part of him. The dude works a 40-hour week, but he likes to do it in 2 days. I say
I can kind of identify with that.
I say all the time, if I could go to work and work like 3 14s, I totally would. It's just interesting that he's able to maintain that level of success, and he's never fallen behind. He's never missed a deadline. He's not like Hideaki Anno. I don't know if you're familiar with him, the creator of Evangelion.
Yeah, very, very little bit, but yeah.
Yeah, so he's the procrastinator who also then never operates under a deadline, and he just he'll be like, yeah, I'm working on it, and he'll take years to complete one movie, and Toriyama has never run into that problem. Now, maybe it's because he works in the industry he works in, right? If Toriyama worked in the film industry, would he be a Hideaki Anno where he just doesn't do things for you? Does things, obviously, but he doesn't produce anything for years at a time because he's just noted kind of not perfectionist, but this procrastinator type of thing. It's interesting to as a thought experiment that if Toriyama had no deadlines, would he produce? I think we could probably say the answer to that, to at least some extent, is no, right? Because
because even becoming a mangaka, he had to give himself a deadline in order to push himself to do it.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of points towards, yes, he's the type of person where if he doesn't have a hard deadline for something, he's just never going to get around to it.
Right. And once he reaches the end of Dragon Ball Z, he's just yeah, okay, I'm done. And part of that too could really be because when Dr. Slump ended in 84, he wanted a year off. He was like, all right, cool, I had this really successful thing. It ran for 9 years. It made me a lot of money, and I'm good. Torishima is like, nah, man, we got to do the next thing, because the next thing is going to be the one that makes you never have to work again. And Toriyama was like, I want a year off. And Torishima's like, I'll give you 3 months. And that is a working 3 months, because when that 3 months is up, I want you to come in with chapter 1.
Oof. Yeah, I almost wonder, is he the type of artist who, once he's made enough money, he's just like, yeah, I'm done? Because if that's the case, he probably would have just stopped after Dr. Slump, right?
Well, that is Torishima pushing him into Dragon Ball for sure, and probably his wife too, because the one thing about Toriyama is he's a very it's weird, even though he's, a child of the 60s, right? That's kind of and so he's kind of got that in him, and he obviously does a lot of subversion of tropes and expectations and things in his work. He's pretty traditional when it comes to his family views. When he gets married, his wife stops working, even though she's a successful mangaka to herself. She stops working and becomes a housewife. So I wonder if like she too is like, no, you keep work, like, because he talks about how he doesn't know anything about his finances and he just lets that kind of go by itself.
That's a fair point. Maybe he didn't realize he had enough money to retire at that point.
Or maybe his wife was like, yeah, you have a lot of money, but like it's not enough to be done. Like, it's a weird. It's and no one really knows the answer to those questions, right? Did he take this like long break between Z and Super because he was burned out, because he just wanted to focus on like little things? Did he maybe have some not failed attempts, but did he like start working on some things and then be like, this is actually no good, that's actually no good? No one really knows because the dude doesn't talk about himself in interviews. So there's no way of knowing, from 96 to 2011, really no one hears much about this guy. And he's not ever going to offer up what is going on in that time.
Maybe he just got caught up on his backlog of models. He's like, I got that whole house just full of models. I should probably build some of those. Maybe.
I think he just, even now, the way that Dragon Ball Super is written now is Toriyama says, here's like the story ideas for this chapter, and they call him his assistant, but boy, this guy should, I believe at this point he's just basically like a mangaka unto himself, essentially. His name is Toyotaru. He illustrates and puts it all together. Mm-hmm. Toriyama is like, here's what I want to happen in this chapter, and you go write it. And then this guy, I assume, I don't know 100%, I assume he goes and writes it and then brings it back to Toriyama, and Toriyama will be like, that's good, change this, change that, right? Toriyama's the creator and the story like guy.
The editor now too.
Yeah, and
that's the case.
Yeah, and he's kind of like, he's responsible for it, but he's also not the day-to-day or week-to-week guy who's actually writing and drawing it anymore. So I wonder if it just took that kind of coming across his desk, right? So he decides he's done in 95, and then in 96, and what was that, 96 through, how long did GT run for? Just a year? 2 years?
I try to not remember.
It just ran for 2 years. It just ran from 96 through 97. But, he decides he's done. GT comes out with him not really being involved super much, and I don't think it was like a big hit or anything. He also probably gets his much needed like actual vacation. This is pure speculation on my part. Right? He gets his much needed actual vacation. When they want to bring him back into the fold, he's like, nah, man, at this point I got so much money and I don't need to work anymore. And for whatever reason, it takes them a long time to arrive at this conclusion, but the conclusion ultimately is, hey, what if you came back and you wrote some ideas and you gave us the stories, but we had someone else do all the actual work?
And he was like, and I get all the money, right?
But then at this point now he's like, oh, okay, yeah, I'll do that. One of the other things that probably happens in this down period, because this is just, again, this is another thing that I'm extrapolating from knowing stuff about how the Godzilla series operated. One of the things that probably happens in this down period is they're trying to get this American production off the ground, the live action adaptation, and they are probably thinking, let's not put out anything until we get that going, and maybe kind of you do like a crossbreed of the two, right? Like we will sit on any ideas we have until we can get that off the ground, so that then we can take advantage of the renewed popularity when that live action film comes out, and that live action film takes much longer to come out than they thought, because that happened with Godzilla. Basically, they tried for years to get an American film adaptation made. You wonder if film development on Dragon Ball Evolution began.
I mean, like even right now, like
it began in 2002, and the movie doesn't come out until 2009.
Right, and I mean, I can think of probably like half a dozen movies off the top of my head where they're in production hell.
Right,
and it just takes forever for something to get going.
That could be another thing that happens in that time frame, is like he's got ideas and he wants to do it, or doesn't want to do it, but no one's asking him because they're focused on getting this live action adaptation made. So,
and then that flopped, and they said, "Quick, pull the Toriyama ripcord. Let's save this."
Yeah. And then he does come back to the series in 2012, and in 2013 the Battle of Gods movie comes out, and we've been pretty flush with content since then, actually.
Yeah.
So, yeah, but that's Toriyama, the man, the myth, the legend, the introvert. A man after my own heart in that respect. God, if I could never see people, I would just love that. Have you calmed down enough that you can recall some details about what you saw in that other chamber?
Well, let's see. There were 5 of them. 3 chased us out. 2 seemed largely immobile, or the reaction time was so slow I never saw them move. Maybe they are the young of those things outside, like you guessed. They had similarly shaped heads, to an extent at least. When they chased us, they were shambling and shuffling, not as fluid in their movements as the ones that ate that other guy's head. There seemed to be a piled-up mound on the far left side of the chamber. Might have been soft. A well-placed blast might make a hole big enough for us to escape through, but small enough that they have to dig, which would slow them down.
Okay, so we break for the back portion of the chamber. I'll head left, you head right. That way, each of us has an identical chance. We each fire an energy blast. If you don't hit pay dirt, maybe you hit one of them and you take it out. Whoever hits the soft mound yells out. We fly through that together. Once we're out, we look for landmarks and we fly towards the ship.
Do you think you'll be able to recognize anything out there?
No, but I called the ship to our location using my scouter, and it should be right over our heads, however high that is, to not crash. Ready?
No, but yes.
Okay. 3, 2, 1, go!
Damn it! It's on your side!
Turn yourself around and follow behind me! Are you back there? Are you... Bekinney! Bekinney!
Kind of, yeah. Wait, it's night? How long were we down there?
Shut up and fly!
Look, there's the ship!
We made it! We made it.
I died again, but yeah, sure, we made it.
What are you talking about? You're right here.
I am.
Like I said before, weird guy. Anyway, while we wash off insectoid guts and dirt, we'll take our leave of you here, listeners. Will we ever learn why Bekinney looks invigorated and young after facing down danger? Will I ever get the stench of cricket juice out of my hair? Will we ever explain how it is that 2 species from 2 totally different planets both knew what crickets were? Find out next time and help us achieve our final forum.
Final Form is written and produced by Tom Gwelly. It is performed by Dan Kinney and Tom Gwelly. Our webmaster is Dan Kinney. Our theme music is provided by YouTube content creator GVG Kid. Want to learn more about the Dragon Ball universe, including concept art, behind-the-scenes interviews, and recommendations from Jelli and Bekinney? Connect with us on social media. Like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Final Forum Pod. Make sure to subscribe, rate, and review wherever you receive your podcasts. And of course, make sure to share it with your friends and family and help us spread the word of the glory of Lord Frieza. The Frieza Force thanks you for your listenership.